Okay, we'll begin with public comment. If you, who would like to start? Okay. Oh, and 3-minute time limit, and you're keeping track?
Thanks. My name is Gabe Weiss. Bobby Burns suggested I speak here after an ongoing discussion regarding transportation with him, Sarah Fiorito, Commander Glue, and a few others, since what I'm asking for required money. I commute primarily by bike. My child also rides to school and activities. But I've also raced cars, own a turbocharged Subaru and a 1968 MGB. As a car guy, I say we need to understand their place. And it's not downtown, it's not using residential neighborhoods as through roads, and it's not treating our streets as racetracks. When bad infrastructure puts bikes and cars in conflict, it puts people in conflict, and it's the city's fault for designing it that way. The best places in the world to visit and spend money are where the streets are for people. If we want to encourage people to walk and ride their bikes, we're not going to do it by prioritizing their ability to drive everywhere and find abundant parking, offering few safe and pleasant alternatives. If it's not safe or doesn't feel safe to walk or ride a bike, people won't do it. You have to build infrastructure for riders to use it. Bike the Ridge is an example. I also noticed many users on Sheridan's protected lane with the concrete curb, but few on Dodge with many adults riding on the sidewalk, and almost nobody in the painted lane on Emerson. I shared a video of a Ryan Field truck almost killing me when a lane disappeared east of Ridge into downtown, which makes it obvious why many ride on the sidewalks instead. Bobby says he's been working with a consultant who says there's a substantial federal funding for infrastructure projects. As the city looks into sidewalk improvements, it would be an opportune time to address parking, off-street bike lanes, and aggressively implementing traffic calming measures, not just downtown, but throughout the city. I look at Main Street and the new Sharrows and fully expect a conflict with cars if I ride it. A missed opportunity endangering and discouraging bikes in favor of street parking. The goal is not to prevent people from driving, but rather give us the choice of active transportation by making robust infrastructure available. If that sounds extravagant, it only shows how indoctrinated we've become to accept giving over public space to private vehicles. An eighth mile in any direction, and there's a street full of cars. Every half mile is a major road. Howard, Oakton, Maine, Dempster, Church, Emerson, all major car and truck roads. By comparison, we have one protected lane on Sheridan and a couple lanes buffered by paint and plastic in a few other places. It's nowhere near sufficient for commuters, let alone kids and families. It may sound like a nice-to-have luxury, but when it comes to meeting the city's transportation and economic goals, bike lanes and sidewalks are foundational to building a vibrant and busy downtown, as many case studies have shown. Prioritizing humans over multi-lane roads and street parking is good economics. In addition to infrastructure, we need police to monitor driver behavior towards people on bikes. This could be done with our bicycle officers riding unmarked and warning or ticketing drivers who pass dangerously, disregard the 3-foot state law, or obstruct a bike lane. Make the public aware and start to change behavior through enforcement. This is something that can help now without waiting on a construction timeline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Good evening. This is Ray Friedman, 2nd Ward. After speaking for about, 7-8 years now of public comment, still trying to figure out when we have a discussion with residents on items that are pertinent to all of us. The one thing I wanted to talk about tonight was, and have a discussion, which I understand we're not going to do, but it's 909 Davis. And where are we at with that project, and why would we be spending $2.5 million per year? I understand we already signed a contract. I've asked several aldermen, what is the process for this? What has been done? When do the residents get involved? Is there a discussion with residents on 909 Davis? Are we moving forward, or what's going to happen with that project? Why would we be spending $37 million for a 15-year contract when we have a beautiful building right here that we could put $2.5 million per year into this building or other buildings that the city owns? So it just seems something wrong with that, putting money into somebody else's pocket rather than looking out for the residents. So I'm still wondering now. I know Mary Rosinski filed a lawsuit for violation of Open Meetings Act. I understand she won. So if she won that, and we're in violation Open Meetings Act, did we have a meeting on 909 Davis with residents? I haven't gotten an answer from anybody. Jonathan? It doesn't make sense to me. And if we already went ahead and signed a contract for 15 years to rent for $2.5 million a year, and we didn't have a discussion, and we're still in violation of Open Meetings Act, then that contract should be null and void.
Yeah.
We need to have a conversation with the residents.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I'm eligible for public comment because I'm an elected official of a governmental agency, which unfortunately relies on the city to levy our taxes. Here's my treasurer, Mr. Desai. Is he limited to 3 minutes tonight? I won't go much over that, but bear with me. I had to miss the meeting on August 27th, and I am extremely grateful you made the wise choice to adopt the actuarial as presented. That's a good move. It presents a challenge, and you're having to come up with an additional $9 million, either from PPRT and or reserves, and I'm sure you're up to that. I'm curious about some of the way this was laid out here in the proposed budget. On page 21, you show the almost $20 million of tax levy, which is 67% of the total amount that we're going to need. And then on page 35, it says pension trust funds are not included in the budget. Well, if you have a tax levy, it's in the budget. On page 39, you have the pension funding policy from the 45R23. On page 49, you have the PPRT. On 217 and 218, you have the revenue and the PPRT. And on 218, there's an empty box on PPRT, although Mr. Desai has just told me that was dumped into the general fund, so it's available to pull that money. So on page 6, referencing the transmittal letter, it says the pension property tax levies and the city contributions to the pension funds are set by the city council and continue to be recorded in the general fund. I believe this to be not a true statement. The city levies the pension money, the county collects the pension money, and the county deposits it into the pension funds, police and fire. Doesn't sit in the general fund. So that disclosure is troubling. I'm also troubled by, on page 454, you list the debt. I fail to see the truth in taxation. You list the outstanding GO debt, which is 185 million some odd, the IEPA debt of almost 49 million, and the debt service totaling 259 million. Nowhere are you showing the 243.68 million that the pension funds are owed, which are accruing interest at about almost $16 million a year. So the city debt, the total city debt, is really over $500 million. It's 3 million, it's 503, 243, 275. And you're only showing the city bonded debt. The pension debt is equal to or larger than that, and I think that is disingenuous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Mary Rosinski, did you have a public comment?
I was trying to I think I just had a question regarding the increase in the Parks and Rec food budget. I'm not sure where that is allocated, and the increase from a very low number to like where it is now. I'd love to know what that money is and what it's for. Someone else may have already brought that question up. I don't know, but that would be nice to know.
Okay, thank you. Any? Carl Klein, would you like to make a public comment?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I have two questions. I've emailed you all, but I want to ask at the meeting. So after reviewing the September 27th city manager report, I noticed that if you search for interfund transfers in the report, there is a line item for interfund transfers 27 times. And I am wondering what is the reason for all of this money moving around. And I would appreciate an answer. One example of money moving around is the personal property replacement tax revenue paid to Evanston from the state of Illinois. This money is supposed to go directly towards paying off pension debt service. Instead, this money was placed into the general fund. There is now not a clear way to track this money and ensure that it will go towards what it is intended for. An interfund transfer of this money could go to anything and not what it was intended for. Also, after reviewing the proposed 2025 budget, I noticed that there is a 3,066.7% increase in the budget for recreation outreach program account 100.30.3050.650025. The amount appropriated for this account in 2024 was $6,000. Now, in 2025, it is appropriated for $190,000. You can find this on page 190 of the budget. Any clarification you can provide for the need to spend $190,000 on food for the recreation outreach program would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, we'll call the meeting to order.
Yes, we will take roll in the room, and then we'll go to one online. Councilmember or Committee Member McMillan.
Here.
Councilmember Nusma.
Here.
Committee Member Livingston.
Here.
Chair Rikus.
Here.
Councilmember Reed.
Here.
And Councilmember Kelly.
Here. Sorry about that.
Okay. So as part of, after the call to order, we have an in-person quorum. There's a virtual committee member who is participating. Councilmember Kelly, would you like to declare a reason that eligible reason that you're participating remotely, as outlined by the
Open Meetings
law
Act.
department? Yeah, our newest, Open Meetings Act.
OMA and council rules.
Yes. And then for this quorum to vote whether or not you can then vote on action items in tonight's meeting. You're still allowed to participate remotely in discussion.
Okay, yeah, I'm traveling, so I don't know that it constitutes I'm out of the country.
Okay, sounds
So
good. All right, great. So Councilmember Kelly is still allowed to participate in discussion. She just will not be able to vote on action items in today's agenda.
Okay, can I have the approval of the August 27th, 2024 minutes? So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Yeah.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and can I have the approval of the September 10th, 2024 Finance and Budget Committee meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Hitesh, now we're going to do the review of the 2023 single audit.
Good evening, Chair, the members of the Finance and Budget Committee. It is this Chief Financial Officer. The single audit, which is the audit of the federal grants money spent, I think that we have a deadline of September 30th, so it concluded just a couple of days before this deadline. And we got the report from the Prado and Rancheria, the CPA firm, and obviously they have said in their report, if you go down to the further right there in the second paragraph, in our opinion, the financial statement referred to above present fairly in all material respect the expenditure of federal efforts of the city for the year ended December 31st in accordance with the accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. So it's fair. You can read through then there is a schedule of expenditures, which were because we have a variety of programs in city of Evanston where we spend the federal grants money. If we scroll down further, there's just, I think, and I was so glad that there's one comment, and particularly, considering the ARPA requirements, they are kind of so rigid in some of those things. We had the further down, I think, on page, this is the page 10. Let me just bring up the page. It is yes, it is a page 14 or the page 16 of the PDF on that. It will go further down. 16. This is where I want to talk about this, 200, conditions and context. Go further down, yes. Right there, yeah. So if you see under the conditions and context, they say we tested 2 purchase orders totaling 208,000, and our procedures revealed the following. The dated documentation that demonstrates suspension and debarment searches were performed prior, and the other one is documentation supporting multiple source solicitation was not available. And so I just want to explain here, this year they tested almost $4.2 million worth of transactions, and kind of found 2 POs worth 208,000, which is roughly 5%. These 2 purchases, these were one of the vehicles and the others were motorcycles. They went to the city council for approval, for funding and others, out of equipment replacement fund. So there were no requirements, ARPA requirements needed at that time. They followed our purchasing manual. Later on, we realized that, yes, to help the equipment replacement fund, we can use the ARPA funds. And so later on, we made the what we call an accounting journal to transfer from ARPA to the equipment replacement fund. Now, this will, their second comment, they said documentation supporting multiple sources. So these were a single source, because at that time, the fleet fund, the department, they reach out to the various vendors and they did not have the right type of vehicle they were looking for in motorcycle and the other vehicle. And obviously, they explained that thing in their memo to the city council at that time, that's why they are going with the single source thing. And city council obviously got the memo, explained the whole thing, that why it's that. We have included department searches in our policies, reinforced need. That's one of the things they mentioned last time, and even, yes, we continue to work with, I have brought up at the department director's level in other things, and when we work with these people who we are trying to continuously reinforce that point. Obviously, ARPA is coming to an end, and even whatever we're using, right, Clayton, this year or for next year, it is ARPA interest money, which has no restriction. It is unrestricted money for the vehicle purchase, since we are using the interest-only amount, not the program money. So that would be good, and so, yes, we are making every progress. We even updated the purchasing manual right around 22, 23 when we got the ARPA and started making the purchases and shared those things with the other department personnel. So, but overall, yeah, I'm so glad that the kind of spending we have of all the federal grants, it came down to just, these 2 POs, and that too, technically, the purchase was not out of ARPA initially.
I think Claire is.
Oh, Councilmember Kelly?
So I just want to make sure I'm reading this clearly. It looks like this is the 3rd year that we haven't implemented the required suspension and debarment checks. Is that right?
We have implemented. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to understand, I understand that, we're going to be making corrections now to this, but in fact, it just seems like this has happened, if I'm understanding this correctly, this has happened repeatedly.
It happened last time, and again, there were some issues where we conducted, and I think if you further go down, there are some technical issues where it says that, okay, we did not conduct that. Further down, the next page in our response is, views of the responsible official. So sometimes, when you go onto SAMS.gov and they don't do the things, the vendors or all that, and it would say that, okay, we did not conduct. It would be the inconclusive. If you read the views of the responsible official, we have explained the situation, that what happens in some of the cases. And we corrected, and that's why Councilmember Kelly, they've like tested almost, as I said, $4.2 million of transactions. And they found these two, which were originally purchased out of the equipment replacement.
Anyone else?
So we won't expect to see this again next year,
Yes.
correct? There won't be a failure to implement the required suspension and debarment checks?
Correct.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Do I have a motion to recommend filing the single audit?
So moved.
Second.
Do you need roll call?
Okay. Committee Member McMillan?
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Committee Member Livingston?
Aye.
Chair Rikus?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Passed 5-0. Thank you.
Okay, now FB2, transfer from general fund to equipment replacement fund and special assessment fund.
So moved for discussion.
Second.
Good evening, Clayton Black, Budget Manager. We mentioned this a couple months ago that this would be coming forward here towards the end of the year. You may remember last year at this time we came forward with two funds that had various needs and challenges, and we were asking to use general fund reserves to address those needs. Those were the insurance fund and the fleet fund. And so we did it. This committee approved to transfer those two funds to address that here towards the end of the year. This year in the general fund, there's really just one unbudgeted expense that has moved forward, and that is the South End Rec Center, the Little Beans purchase. Generally, everything else within the general fund this year has been budgeted and planned for. These two recommended transfers were not included in the budget, but we did discuss them at the last meeting, and we discussed this aerial ladder truck earlier this year. The request is to utilize general fund reserves to cover both of these transfers. We talked about how earlier this year that the aerial ladder truck would be included in our 2025 budget and planned for accordingly. This transfer of money here would happen here at the end of this year, and then we would expend the money next year. It's budgeted in next year's budget to be spent to actually buy the fire truck. The other transfer is a transfer to our special assessment fund. Laura's here and can go into more detail on this if you would like. But essentially, we've got a wait list of about 86 petitions long, so that's 86 alleys in need of repair. Right? It's one petition per alley.
It's 74 total alleys.
Got it. 86 total people, 74 alleys in need of repair. Big backlog, and so we're looking for $1 million transfer to special assessment. In order to avoid, in both of these instances, the only other funding source likely in next year's budget would be issuance of GO bonds. So that's an option as well if the committee doesn't want to do this transfer now. But we do have those reserves available in the general fund to execute this transfer and move both of these forward. So happy to answer any questions.
Oh, Councilman Reed?
Thank you. I would strongly recommend that this committee support moving this forward to council. The city has for far too long, I mean, this is just one piece of infrastructure, particularly the alleys, but we have underfunded this program for far too long, and I think it's really a shame that city infrastructure didn't make it into our council goals, but for a lot of residents, this is definitely a priority for them, and since we have the healthy reserves to make this transfer, I would support it.
Thank you. Committee Member Lip.
Couple questions. Little Beans, you said, does not qualify for moving to a GO bond
That is
funding?
correct. Since
And why is that?
you have to, prior to expending the money, if you plan to issue bonds, you have to adopt a reimbursement resolution saying that you'll eventually issue bonds to pay for the project. This is something that this committee sees January, February of every year, where we ask you to approve the list of capital projects for that year.
Mhm.
We didn't do that for Little Beans, so it's not an option.
And what about the fire truck?
That is an option. The money hasn't gone out the door yet for that project, so
Yeah.
it is an option for that.
So my thought would be we are, as we'll talk about more in the budget, quickly depleting the excess reserves in the general fund. And I think something like a fire truck is the definition of a long-lived asset that benefits the community for a long period of time and could, could be reasonably funded over time. So I
any
would.
fire person, but I mean, again, we issue the bonds for 20 years. I don't know whether we have a life. It's a little short than 20 years, I think,
Well,
right? 15 to 17 years. And then so in that sense, purely from financial standpoint, yeah, it doesn't make sense to issue the bond,
Well, but the bonds that we issue are 20 tranches of funding,
I
right?
mean,
It's not just
yes.
one bond for 20 years. There's all sorts of things in there that might not last for
I mean,
20
I
years.
just
So-
thought, and we got the sense, obviously, when this committee and as well as the council, when approved this thing, that yes, and particularly with the general fund in a healthy condition right now, it's been approved, yes. And Lara has a tough time always to kind of find, there are a lot of needs competing for the bond issue. And obviously, depending on the rate environment, we see a kind of reduction in the bond amount. In the past, yeah, I mean, exception of 1 or 2 years, we used to only issue $10, $12 million bonds, So that's the other thing that, okay, if we include 2.3 million, it could be at the cost of some other CIP project. And so that's the
And would fire trucks typically not be bonded? Would they
No.
be paid out of the general
I mean,
fund?
We haven't done that. I could remember maybe 20 years back we had some fleet bonds, but since then we haven't issued the bonds. Even 3 years back, right around COVID, we went to the council with some funding from bonds for fleet, and they denied that. And so we basically depend on general fund.
Okay. That's fine then. I would not characterize the general fund as being in good shape, and we'll get into that later. Okay.
Councilman Kelly?
Thank you. So did the Foreign Fire, I just want to clarify, the Foreign Fire Tax Board, are there any funds from that going towards the fire truck?
I don't know because we checked with the fire chief and some of them. They are already contributing towards some of the small equipment. And obviously, typically they get around 200,000 every year. So I don't know whether it would go a long way, and they have contributed in the past. And I think chief assured me that, they will continue towards some fire equipment, small equipment, fire gears and all that. They do contribute.
So none of that is going towards this purchase?
Yes.
Okay. And so I know when we discussed this, both at Finance and Budget and at Council, we had discussed that this would roll into our 25 budget. And I know we do have unassigned funds, including considerable amount from the permitting of Bryan's Field. I don't understand why we aren't making this part of our 25 budget, applying unassigned funds. They're not, this truck will not be purchased on January 1st. The explanation given is, so that the money's ready and available on January 1st. The 2024 budget is done. We made a few extra purchases, Little Beans and others, but at this point, it seems to me this should simply be part of our 2025 budget. And we make a decision, and I think we pretty much decided that we would, how that would be funded.
Right. And yes, I agree with you, but we're trying to be cautious and conservative. We don't want to end up in a situation where the fire truck is already approved by the council. It's been ordered. So we need the funding, and the time comes after 6 months or 8 months and say, okay, we are struggling to find $2.4 million. And particularly looking at the healthy fund balance. I mean, it's the same interest or same thing. Does it sit on the general fund or the equipment replacement? But at least we just want to make sure that, we transfer to equipment replacement so we have the funds available when the truck is ready to be delivered.
But we have plenty of funds available. We have lots of unassigned funds at this point, surplus.
Right, but we cannot use that in that sense. I mean, we use it from general fund. I mean, other than that, I don't know which unassigned funds you would characterize. Maybe the human service fund is the one. All other funds are the special revenue funds with a specific purpose. So,
But this won't be purchased for a while. I mean, we're not going to be purchasing this on January 1st.
No, absolutely not in January, sometime in 2025.
So why wouldn't we have it
Right,
part of
not
the 2025 budget? I'm totally confused.
It is in 25 budget. We are just making sure that it is funded. The money is sitting in the equipment replacement fund and not in the general
The excess is in the general fund right now. So he's talking about just moving excess reserve from the general fund to the equipment replacement fund to provide the funds to buy the truck. If we were buying it directly in the truck, in the general fund, then it could
And you'll earn
But it
interest.
doesn't need to be part of the 2024 budget. We can do that as part of the 25 budget. I think this is just too much moving around of a budget that's been passed. We've already done enough of that. We can simply allocate the funds when we have a better idea of our unassigned fund balance beyond our reserves as to how much will go, and we'll, towards that in the 25 budget. I don't see why we should be adjusting our 24 budget at this point.
I mean, I don't see any problem. And as I said, after 8 months and we are struggling to find the money, 2.3, because it's approved. So it's ordered, right? So we need to have funding. It's not that the ambulance is going to be approved by the city council. And that's why I'm taking this kind of cautious approach. We talked about it at the budget team. So yeah, I would leave it up to the committee.
And can you also
Right, and remember we
Claire.
spoke with the owner or Pearson or whatever. It's a sole source deal. They know that we're good for this. This isn't like we have to be ready to pay for it tomorrow. They know that we're going to budget for this in 25. I'm not understanding why the shifting around the funds for 24 now.
Yeah, and again, we are not paying it to Councilmember Kelly. So we just putting it in the equipment replacement. That means it's set aside for that purchase. That's the only purpose, yeah.
Can we approve it and say when the truck is here, we transfer it? Does it have to be transferred now?
No.
It's good to have it in set,
why
but
wouldn't
if
it
you
be?
think that, okay, doesn't make sense to, it's up to the,
And which budget is it in, 24 or 25?
It is going to be, they have budgeted in 25.
Okay, so it's in
We are
25.
just setting aside the funds.
Move it let's move it, when it comes to. Can I go back to the Little Beans explanation? I don't understand why we weren't able to do that in a long term.
Just point of order
bond
on-
again. Pardon?
Point of order. I don't
Yeah,
recall
we're
the
let's
floor.
discuss. Did you have a
Well,
comment
this is
about?
part of the the transfer of funds is the Little Beans transaction.
I don't think it's not part of this.
Okay.
It's just the fire truck and the alleys.
All right.
I don't know why. Yeah, you brought it up, but it's not
We
part of
just
this.
kind of explain, I think it is
He
up
was
to the
just giving an
committee to
example.
decide, yes, whether you want to transfer, but to me, it makes sense to set aside the funds.
Okay, so just to wrap up, our 25 budget will be in effect in 3 months. I don't see any reason now to be making amendments to the 24 budget for this purpose.
I don't think he is. I think he just wants to transfer the funds, but it'll be in the 2025 budget, correct? And you're going to earn interest in that
Doesn't
fund.
matter, yes, same thing.
Councilmember Reed? Or, oh,
Evidently, no.
okay. Councilmember Reed?
Thank you. And Councilmember Kelly was the last person to have the floor, correct? Okay. Yeah. Well, it seems like there's at least agreement on the alleys. I didn't hear anything about that. On the fire truck, I don't know. What does it matter? I'm not understanding what it matters if we transfer it now or if we transfer it later. We know that we're going to spend it in 2025. Just transfer it now. It's going to be set aside. I think this is searching for a problem that doesn't exist. So,
Committee Member Livingston?
Yeah, I would agree. It's really just a balance sheet transaction between funds now. We're not doing anything to the 24 budget. It's an actual movement that's happening in the normal course in 24. So to put the money in the fund, if bonding is not the traditional answer, seems like we should make sure that
you can approve it with the say that, okay, transfer the funds on 1/1/25, January 25.
I would rather have it just for council's accounting purposes. We should know now as we're dealing with the 2025.
I'm just giving.
Yeah, I know, but I'd rather just have it have it in its own fund. Sorry.
Oh, Councilmember Newsom?
Yeah, so just to clarify, this would not require a budget amendment.
No, this would, come part of the budget amendment because we will transfer the money.
Okay.
So yes, it's a transfer out from one fund to the transfer into the other fund.
So this will require a budget amendment, which we do anyway.
Anyway, because there could be some other items like, little bins would be one. Yeah. Right, yeah. But again, you have to say that overall general fund budget, not just one amount. If the general fund budget is under 3 million, before the fire truck, we won't need the amendment. It's the overall amount.
Right. Let's just do it now. We're just transferring money from one pocket to another. It doesn't really.
Okay, are we ready for a motion? Do we have the exact motion
Sorry,
here?
there's no need to do this. I don't even know why you're bothering, but
Point
go
of
ahead.
order.
There's no need to do this, as you pointed out. But if you really feel some need to do a budget
Point of
amendment
order.
when there's no need to, I would question, I seriously question what we're doing here.
Committee Member Livingston?
I don't think we're doing a budget amendment right now. We're moving
Well,
on
we
to
are.
funds.
Point of order. Yeah, point
We're,
of,
we're not doing a budget.
well, we're
amendment
recommending
right
a
now.
budget amendment to council. So by affirming this, we are saying we want council to make
Can
a
we just
budget
do it
amendment to the
January, approve
2024
it
budget.
now?
We
For
are not
January?
talking about the budget amendment at
Well,
this
we're
point.
making this recommendation, which will lead to a budget amendment.
Not necessarily. As long as we stay overall under the general fund budget limit of 143 million, we don't need a budget.
Okay, I think we're ready. Is there an actual motion here? Because I don't.
I move
think we
approval
said
of
that,
the
yeah.
recommendation of staff's
To the
recommendation.
city council.
Oh, staff recommends that the Finance and Budget Committee recommended the City Council that the interfund transfer of 2.3 million from the general fund be approved for the equipment replacement fund and $1 million for the special assessment fund. Do I have a
So
motion?
moved.
Second.
Okay, you want to take a roll call?
It just point of quick order. So this recommendation, what's going to happen at council as a result of us assuming we approve it? What's the next step?
It's just that they will have to approve the funding to city council. Transferring money
Who's they?
between two funds. That's the approval.
Council. So
At
this will
the
be
council.
this will be an item on a future council agenda meeting.
And then what action will council be taking at that time?
The same thing as you guys, just the recommendation that, okay,
Recommendation to who?
to move the money from general fund to equipment replacement and to special assessment fund.
Which is an amendment to the budget.
Not necessarily, as I said,
So then what is
the
it?
budget amendment is driven not by the funding, but by the expense. So if you don't go above the overall general fund expense,
Okay.
so two separate things, funding versus the expenses, yeah. And the budget amendment is driven by expense. What I'm asking here is the funding mechanism.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I will take and roll. Committee Member McMillan.
Yeah, I just don't understand why we're doing this. I've heard that this is what you want to do. There's no,
It would be an appropriate comment. Anything else is not called for. So what is it?
no.
Thank you. Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Committee Member Livingston.
Aye.
Chair Rikus. Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
4-1. Thank you.
Oh.
Pass.
Councilmember Keller? Oh, that's right. That's right.
Jonathan, why don't we let comments like that come from the committee leader, okay? I don't like being spoken to that way.
Okay, we are now going to have a discussion on the proposed budget.
So moved. And seconded by someone.
And first of all, staff, thank you for the summaries and all this work. It's a lot of work I know you had to do, so.
Point of order, just someone. I moved it, someone seconded it.
Second.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have the 2025 proposed budget. Again, yes. Thank you for, as we go through these things, in the next few weeks, obviously, we will go through the city council, finance, budget committee, ward meetings, town hall meetings, and obviously, yes, with a great teamwork from the other departments, Clayton Blacker and Mike, as a part of the budget team. So we are at this point where we are presenting the budget. The overall topics you would see in the next changes to the budget presentation. I think that we got a couple of emails about how we are presenting the interfund transfers and how we are presenting even the pension funds. Then we talk about the general fund, even 24 projections, because that kind of fits into our 25 highlights. And some of the topics you would see the property tax levy increase. There is no tax levy increase. So that's the kind of a highlight, except the library portion, but no tax, some of the fee increase, mainly on the water side, the water rate increase. Public safety pensions, police and fire pensions, they have we are keeping the tax levy flat. So the roughly $9.6 million would come out of the general fund to cover the police and fire pension. Based on the funding policy. New positions, very few, and most of them are either grant funded or offset by something, so which is a kind of a great, And some of the menu of options, I think this is what we heard when we started the process in January. And some of those council members there that, okay, give us the options, if we do this, if we want to increase the revenue or reduce the expense, can you just give some few options? So we have listed that. It is on the website. We have so many budget memos. So, and obviously as we go through the budget process, we would do that instead of responding one-on, so that only one person or one council member knows. When we get the questions from the council or the committee members, we will try to put it in a budget memo and post it on the city website every Friday. So that way it's available to the entire community. And I think that has helped us a lot in the past. So we would do that. Capital improvement program, obviously a whole list of things. Lara is here. And again, it's, input from the city council and the committee to move forward with which programs and obviously related bond options. Again, when you approve the budget, not now, but whenever the city council approves the budget, they are not approving the bond. They just say, yes, potentially 25 million. When we issue the bond, I have to again come with a separate bond ordinance, because that's the confusion every year. Are we approving the bond now? No, you're not approving the bond now. Whenever we issue the bond, it's a whole separate process. And then obviously lastly, the budget calendar. What's next? Obviously we will start the conversation with the city council. We'll see whether we can do that at 14th or maybe on 28th when we have a budget hearing, followed by a lot of ward meetings. Then we have a truth and taxation hearing. Obviously we will focus more on our tax levies, including the special service area tax levies. And obviously we expect, typically like every year, right before the Thanksgiving, the adoption of the budget. So we'll see where we go. Okay, what's the next one? Changes to the budget. Okay, Clayton would take it over and kind of go into the nuts and bolts of the budget,
It's a pretty long presentation, so we'll try to get through it as quickly as possible. But I may hand it back to Hitesh here towards the end for a couple slides as well. So did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if for some reason we can't get through all this, Hitesh and I talked about October 29th, either having a Zoom or another meeting. So we're going to try to get as much as we can done tonight, but there's a lot of material. So
Yeah, and a lot of conversations still with city council. We have ward meetings. We have close to 10 to 12 evening presentations of our budget that lots of opportunities to present and discuss. So, and yeah, if you don't mind waiting through till we get through the presentation to ask questions, that would be great. Much appreciated.
Just want to go on a record to say I've previously let the chair know that I need to leave early for family obligations, so I'll be sneaking out in about 15 minutes.
Okay. That's good. So as Hitesh said, there are 3 items that we wanted to flag, changes to the way that we present the budget information. You'll recall earlier this year, this committee approved a handful of comparable communities, communities similar in size, structure to the city of Evanston. We took a look at those budgets for those communities and found a handful of things that they do a little differently than we do. And they seemed like good ideas. In talking to our auditor and looking at some of the best practices from the Government Finance Officers Association, there are good changes that they would recommend we make to our budget in order to make it more transparent, make sure that we don't double count expenses, and make sure that we're actually communicating our budget in a way that shows those funds that the City Council has authority to appropriate. And so going through these, the first is the treatment of interfund transfers. Essentially, these get double counted as expenses over the past couple years in our past couple budgets. So when you look at that big budget number from last year of 430 million, a good portion of that is double counting of expenses, money moving from one fund, things like what we just approved. That what we just approved will show up as an expense out of the general fund. And then when you buy the fire truck, it'll show up as an expense in the equipment replacement fund. But we're not spending $4.6 million. We're spending just $2.3 million. So we thought it was important this year to break out those interfund transfers and more clearly show what the actual size and scope of the city's budget is. And so there is a separate part and downloadable piece in the online budget where you can download the full list of interfund transfers called out that you can see what those are. Second is use of fund balance. This is something we budget as a revenue, but it's not really a true revenue in that the fund balance is budgeted in the year in which it's received, not in the year that it's spent. So anytime you use reserves, those don't show up as revenues in the current year. They showed up as revenues in the previous years, and then you're simply drawing on those reserves in the current budget. We do show it as a revenue in order to balance the general fund and debt service fund to make sure we're presenting a balanced budget. But again, not true revenues. And then finally, appropriation of funds. We were looking at the city of Naperville budget, spoke with Sikich, our auditor, and found several other communities that don't actually budget their pension funds as part of their annual budget because the city council doesn't have appropriation authority over those funds. The state of Illinois defines those benefits. The separate pension boards control and budget those funds, not the city council. So it's not necessary, and it also results in double counting of those expenses whenever you show, again, the transfer out of the general fund for the city contribution and the spending of those funds for retired participants within those pension plans too. So that's why in this plan we've mirrored Naperville and a couple other of our comparable communities in excluding them from the budget. That said, we do show the pension property tax levy as we always have. We show the city's contribution from the general fund as we always have. So that part is still appropriated by the city. The city still controls the pension property tax levy and the amount that goes to the public safety pension fund. So the part they control remains in the budget. The part that the city council doesn't control no longer shows up as part of the budget. So hopefully that's an explanation of those three changes that we made to the presentation format. Looking at the overall budget, when you exclude transfers, there's a $13.4 million decrease in expenses. You can really tie it back to these 5 things I have listed here. So this decrease is a result of the water intake project moving closer to completion, less ARPA money to be able to spend. There is an increase in capital spending of $16.2 million. The CIP that Laura presented last month, that is the CIP that's reflected in this budget. We fully anticipate some prioritizations, scaling back of that plan, but at least putting that full plan in there results in an increase of $16.2 million. Salaries and wages are the other piece, $4.5 million, mirroring our contractual agreements, our results of collective bargaining, that's those wage increases. And then other general decreases in other places of about $3.3 million of trimming back expenses in certain areas. The water intake project, ARPA, and other are decreases. The capital fund and salaries and wages are increases, and that net is the $13.4 million decrease in the budget. When you look at transfers, there's a $4 million difference between last year's transfers out and this year's transfers out. That entire difference is the public safety pension transfer going up by $4 million. So whenever you throw in pensions, that kind of gives you the sixth item that's causing the swing in these numbers. We included this in last year's budget. It's helpful again to kind of show some of the reasons for the change in our budget since 2021. It is definitely up from our 2021 adopted budget, and we've put this together to try to explain some of those areas where the growth has occurred. 2, I already talked about the water intake project and ARPA. That is the light blue line here and the pink line down here. Again, neither of those things were in our 2021 budget. Salaries and benefits, large increases in this year's budget following those 2023 wage agreements, collective bargaining agreements, and those are the green bar right here. The capital program I already talked about at its full amount. That's the yellow bar here. Again, likely to be prioritized and reduced over the next couple months as we discuss further. And then city's contribution to public safety pensions up $9 million since our 2021 budget. So that's the dark blue line here. So these items I really just talked about driving almost all of the growth in our budget spending from 2021 to our budget in 2020 to the proposed budget you have in 2025. This is the same information in a pie chart format, so you can see salaries and benefits, the biggest contributor this year, the capital program, followed by ARPA, other, and then equity, sustainability fund spending, city's contributions to pensions, some general changes in transfers as well. So again, just helpful to see kind of where we were in 2021 and how we've ended up with this proposed budget today. So that's the whole budget, focusing now just on the general fund. I had this on the screen a couple months ago. Not much has changed for our general fund revenue projections. Some minor changes, but we're generally looking at the same low end, high end range for our revenues. Some of the bigger swings, there were a couple changes. We have seen sales taxes start to level off. So that's a little bit of a reason for concern looking into next year. After several month-over-month growth compared to the year before, the last 2 months we've seen sales tax returns actually be a little bit less than the same month last year. So we've started to see them level off a little bit. Two other revenues that are continuing to cause concern, PPRT. We've received $2 million in PPRT against a budget of $3.5 million. So it's 41% behind where we were last year, projecting to finish around 2.3 to 2.4 million this year. And then real estate transfer taxes as well, likely to finish well below budget unless we have a big influx of property sales towards the end of the year. And again, now that we've approved these two if City Council is to approve these two transfers we just discussed, this would be the ending fund balance for the general fund at the end of 2024. So you can see we're looking at a range of about 45 million to 52 million as the ending general fund balance. So again, that's the healthy reserve that Hitesh was talking about earlier, really driven by two things. One is the one-time permit revenue from Northwestern, $12 million, and two is the staff vacancy savings, which we assumed around 3.7 million. We've got a higher vacancy rate than that, so we're looking at about 7.4 million. If we were fully staffed, and if the football one-time permit revenue didn't come in, these ending fund balances would be 20 million less than what they are. So we'd be looking at 24 million to 32 million. Fortunately, those two things have happened, so we're sitting on a healthy fund balance and able to do the things we're doing in this proposed budget. This slide now looks at the 2025 general fund revenues, and it shows where we've set those based on this year's high-low projections. You'll see I already talked about the leveling off of the sales tax and home rule sales taxes. We've been a little bit conservative there, assuming a slight decrease compared to where we expect to finish this year, very, very small. But there are a couple others where we've been a little aggressive, a little more aggressive than we have in the past, and hopefully those pan out. And again, that's PPRT projected to finish at 2.5 million this year. We budgeted that same amount for next year. And real estate transfer taxes, we're projecting to finish with 1.4 to 1.7. Hopefully, as interest rates go down, property sales go up, and we start to see some of what we were seeing a couple years ago in real estate transfer taxes. But we're being a little aggressive with the 2.5 million, considering we're only looking at 1.6 million this year. So that's kind of the trend that this committee and others have asked us to do, is be more aggressive with some of our projections, and so we've tried to do that, and we're coming in a little closer this year and hopefully next year as a result of that. General fund highlights, just a few other ones. So one is the required annual contribution to public safety pensions. We've already talked about that at this committee, and we have a few more slides on that later, but there's the $4 million jump to 29.6 against the property tax levy of 20 million. So that means the 9.6 million will be coming from other funding sources other than the property tax levy. We've got wage increases across the board, 3%, except for police sergeants, 4% wage increases per contracts. We've got a slide on new positions later. And I think the last piece, which is really kind of reflects the work we put into this budget, operating requests in the general fund. So this is non-wages, non-salaries, are up just $19,000 or 0.1%. We worked really hard this year to look at these budgets and these accounts where we're not spending money, and look at some of these accounts that are going over, and try to true up and make sure that we're containing the growth and moving and budgeting the money where it needs to be budgeted in order to get the work done. There was one question earlier during public comment about food budget in Parks and Rec. That is entirely us budgeting what we need to budget for the ETHS food program. There's a meal program that's fully grant funded by the school, and we can provide more information on that if necessary. But in the past, I think the Parks and Rec Department thought, well, since we're getting the grant, we don't have to budget the expense. And that's not the case. You have to budget both the expense and the revenue, and they essentially match up with each other.
They match up?
Yep. So this year you should see a matching revenue to match that expense in the budget. So with all that, here is how we balance the 2025 budget. So we have a baseline deficit of $7 million, and these are the changes we make in order to bring it into balance. The first one is using the fund balance, which probably comes at the end, but is here at the top. Next is the Good Neighbor Fund revenue. So through our agreement with Northwestern, they've agreed to give us $3 million a year in revenue, with the first $1 million going to affordable housing, $500,000 going to sustainability, and $1.5 million to the city to use as it sees fit. And so this continues what we did in last year's budget to help offset the need for a property tax increase or other fee increases, and it simply moves that money to the general fund to cover general fund expenses. We've moved the vacancy rate up from 4% to 6%. We're sitting around 8% in the most recent pay period, so we're hopeful that 6% is a more realistic number for our vacancy savings. Transfer to equipment replacement fund, Hitesh already talked about this a little bit with the single audit, but this year and in next year's budget, we're proposing to use ARPA interest income that we've earned on that large pot of ARPA cash to purchase vehicles. If we didn't have that available, that would become a general fund expense. At some point, we're not going to have cash earning interest in ARPA, and this is going to become a responsibility of the general fund to pick back up and purchase vehicles. I already talked about the pension contributions. Just two other big expenses that we wanted to flag, both kind of personnel related. One is additional police overtime and comp time. So we've gotten a lot of requests for police overtime at events. And so this is kind of truing up the need for police at special events, things like protests, city council meetings, and other events where they're needed. And then a new position request in public works that we'll talk about more later. But this is sort of the one position in the general fund that is not offset by expense reductions or offset by other revenues. And we wanted to flag it to make sure that you could see the impact that position does have on the general fund. So with that, it takes $12.5 million in general fund reserves in order to balance the general fund. So it's a lot to balance the general fund, $12.5 million in reserves. If that trend continues, this graph, which we put up during the last couple of budgets, fortunately, we've had this graph up the last couple of budgets, and one-time things have happened that have helped kind of push off that falling off point. $12 million in Northwestern Stadium permit revenue, $7 million in savings from staff vacancies. If those one-time things, well, things like the football stadium aren't going to happen again, this could be what we're looking at if there's a refusal to raise property taxes, identify other revenues, or cut expenses. These projections account for a steady reduction to our vacancy rate, but a $12.5 million burn in general fund reserves in 1 year, obviously not something that's super sustainable in the long run. But something we are able to do as part of this year's proposed budget. A majority of the city council told us that as long as we have the reserves we have, there's a hesitancy to raise property taxes. So we did not include that in our proposed budget and instead relied on reserves in order to put this budget together. All right, the property tax levy, as I said, it's held flat. The city portion is held flat. You can see we've moved a couple levies
But
around.
Clayton,
Yes.
since we've gone through the expenses, can we take just a couple questions before you go
Yeah, that'd
to
be
the
fine.
tax levy?
That'd be fine.
I just had three quick questions. Is there other revenue coming from Northwestern? I thought they're paying us a certain amount every year.
So that's the three.
No, that's the good neighbor, but I thought for the new stadium, we were getting certain.
Same thing. Good neighbor.
Okay.
Community
same
benefits
thing.
agreement.
Okay.
We're talking about the same thing.
And again, I know this, we just approved it, but is there any ARPA money for the fire truck or that's, no?
At this time, not to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. And then I saw online there were these 30 items. I don't know if you're going to cover that, but that's something maybe we could talk about later. So committee member McMillan.
Oh,
I
point of
had a
order.
question
I'm
on the
sorry.
ARPA money.
I flipped my light on a while ago, and
Oh, I'm sorry. I
as
thought
the
it
maker
was
of the
from
motion,
before.
I'm able to.
Councilmember Reed and then back to you. I thought that was.
And then
an old one.
Councilmember Newsma, did you have before you leave? I see you're packing up. You're good. Okay.
But do you have a question before you leave?
Yeah, that's what I was. Okay.
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 Hundreds. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I really want to talk about first looking at some of our revenue here, or savings, the vacancy rate. I don't know if I want to go as aggressive as 6% for 2025, partially because I don't want a vacancy rate to hinder our ability to hire staff and make the city manager or other folks think, well, let's hold off on filling some of these positions so we can make sure that we're lining up with the budget. Maybe that influences Luke, maybe it doesn't, but it probably would influence me if I was the city manager. So I would like to be a bit less aggressive with that. I think we had, it's positive, at least budget-wise, what happened this year. But I'd like to move away from that. I do want to just talk about a few things that were mentioned earlier. One, we talked about the government office, the finance office that provides standards. We worked with them for the putting assets to work. And I just want to remind both us and this committee and that bonding out for capital improvements is not the norm across the board, that is not considered especially bonding out. What in the past we've done is nearly 100% for capital improvements. That's not the norm, and I don't think we should continue down that path. We've actually been able to roll quite a bit of bond debt off, but I don't think we should go to bonding particularly for anything that's not going to last the lifetime of the bond. But certainly we need to start rolling more of that capital expense into either a general fund or new revenue sources. I also want to remind us that excess reserve is excess reserve. It's above our reserve policy. And when we have $30 million or $20 million now, closer to in excess reserve, that's money that's not in the community. That's money that, folks don't have to pay rent, that folks don't have to pay bills, and we are hoarding that money as the city. Again, having a healthy reserve is good, but we should look at excess reserve as literally taking money out of the pockets of our residents and just holding it above and beyond our reserve policy. And so I think it's a good thing for us to spend down our excess reserve over time to get that money back out into the community, doing what it should be doing, which is supporting our families. I really want to focus on think about new revenue. Are we getting to that now, or
So we do have a slide at the end with the menu of options.
Okay. So then I'll hold that until then. As far as expenses, I know I spoke to. I'd like to see us. Our Parks and Rec budget, I think, needs to be expanded a bit. There's a program that we had a few years ago, and I'm not sure if it's in there, but to support block parties. It was ARPA supported originally, meant to bring together community, and it's something that we ran out of funding for, and I guess this was the year that we ran out of funding, 2024. I think the last time we did it was 2023, maybe even 2022. And that needs to come back, particularly for communities like mine, communities like Councilmember Burns, the Second Ward. I think we need it all over the city. Every community needs that. But I think particularly for communities where there's a higher density of lower income residents, sometimes it's harder to create those block parties. And I think with the city, what Audrey and her team did the years that we had the funding was truly phenomenal and brought together communities that may not interact with each other, especially in such a positive way. And so I would love to see the Parks and Rec Department put together a proposal for that. I know that Councilmember Burns has also discussed with the Parks and Rec team about expanding our summer youth program into the winter. I would love to see, and again, if it's here, please let me know. But I'd love to make sure that, the team has again, we've lost some of our council members. And so I guess I'm just the only council member speaking here now, but I do think that there is, and I wish there were some nodding heads from council, but some agreement that these are things that are important that we want to see included in the budget. And so the program to expand the mayor's summer youth or whatever we call it now, hopefully it's just the city youth employment program into the winter to ensure that youth that are at high risk are continuing to, have employment opportunities. And I think this would be just for the city portion of that, not for the entire program, but just for the jobs that the city provides, such as the clean team and other positions. And so I think, and I think those roles tend to target the higher, the youth that are at higher risk. And so I just love to see that in the budget. helps keep our community safer, helps keep it more welcoming for everyone. So I will pause there. Thank you, Chair.
And I just want to add one thing. The reason I think that we're not going through the entire reserves is because if we can go a few more years and not have to raise property taxes, that's why we're not going to get rid of all the reserves right away. So, Committee Member McMillan.
I just want to say I agree with absolutely everything you said, Councilmember Reed, both regard to the bonds, the reserves, and the programming that you're talking about. So bravo to you. I wanted to ask a question with regard to ARPA. My understanding is those funds have to stay in a pretty discrete fund. Is that right?
They're tracked in their own fund. That's
right. But it sounded like what you were saying is that the interest can be used outside of ARPA.
The interest
is that
income,
right?
The interest that we earn on the
ARPA
is
reserve
not subject to the federal guidelines of ARPA. And last year we used that to purchase vehicles to avoid having to put that expense back in the general fund. Those vehicles aren't subject to the rules that Hitesh talked about earlier, so it makes it much easier to purchase those vehicles effectively too. And so we're proposing the same thing.
I just assumed everything had to be kept in a discrete fund.
We can take that out of the interest out of ARPA.
Good.
And use it as we see.
Any other questions? Councilmember Kelly? You might be muted.
She is. You're muted, Claire. There you go.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Committee Member McMillan just reminded me of a question that I've had, and I think I asked in an email and haven't, I think, about our total interest earned, not just on ARPA, but on all of our investment and savings.
I mean, I think at least the 23 audit report is out there. We earned around $6.5 million last year. I mean, so far we are close to, I think.
You're saying the total interest was $6.5 million last year?
Correct. I think I'll have to check, but I
and
think.
How much did we budget this year for? How much did we budget for 24? What did we budget total for interest?
I mean, we are so conservative on the budget because yes, and this is again the standard thing we cannot depend on. I have seen a dramatic change in the interest rate. Obviously, we have already seen the 50 basis rate cut, which is already affecting, our investments as well as our checking account interest. And there's likely to be 3 or 4 more rate cuts in the upcoming year. So we are.
I think we're exceeding already what we budgeted in total interest. What we budgeted, I think we're already far exceeding that.
Yes,
I'm not right?
Right, absolutely, yes. And we would continue to be on the conservative.
That's excess. That adds for our unassigned fund budget.
Correct, yes. So we have exceeded our budget, yes.
Okay, thank you. So, as Clayton stated, and contrary to what David Livingston stated, we are going to end the year with a very healthy, fund balance. So that's good in a way. But I'm also a little bit, I'm glad we looked at other cities to discover that we're double counting revenues and expenses in interfund transfers. But it seems to me that should have been noticed either by our auditor. I'm not sure. Why it took that for us to figure that out. And I think I had questioned this before too, when we double count both expenses and revenues. And I had asked Mr. Desai about this. We budget our reserve based on our full budget, whether it's 100 million over or not. We calculate our reserve based on that. We don't adjust our reserves if it turns out that our expenses are 50 million over, or, we have to adjust our budget drastically, which we have done over the years. This impacts the money still that we are burdening residents with in terms of our reserves and what we keep in our reserves. It's going to be according to that budget. So I guess I just want to know what precluded this from being observed through our auditor, like this, double counting, as you said, in revenues and expenses. Right. Why wasn't this caught by our auditor?
And again, this is not observed by the thing. We initiated this thing. There is nothing right or wrong. We can continue to do that thing. Hundreds of other communities doing this way too. tens of other communities. We just kind of looked at it, particularly after we heard about some of the metrics and some of the communities like Naperville and Park Ridge and other comparable communities, what they do. And we found out. So we confirmed with those communities as well as with the auditor. But again, there is not a right or wrong approach in either way.
If I could just add to that, we're talking about a budget presentation, which was grossing up revenues and expenses. It has nothing to do with the final actual results.
Correct.
Okay. It was just a matter of the pension contribution, for example, was showing up in two places. If you want to look at gross expenses, it was showing up in the general fund. It was showing up in the fiduciary funds, which are the pension funds. So it's purely a matter of grossing up both revenues and expenses. It's not a matter of what the net result was at all. And it's also just a matter of how the budget is being presented, not actual. You know, the auditors don't opine on actual. They opine on budget.
Well, they will be, though. They are. It will. The disparity between actual and adopted is going to be is going to be starting in 26 at one of the first things that are looked at in terms of ratings and audits. So that is important because we do have a very big difference between our actual budgets and our adopted budgets. And this is important that we get closer, that we get a little bit closer to the mark. But I do have a question. So obviously we are changing because that's the way it should happen. With regard to the pensions, can you explain to us how we funded? I know we fund about 19 million roughly is in our levy. How was the rest of the pension funded for in 23 and 24?
Out of general fund.
Right. How much PPRT? How much was taken from, I assume, the unassigned funds?
Can we please get beyond this discussion? I mean, it is that PPRT is a component of the general fund. It's a large grouping of money. The general fund then makes expenses. PPRT is a revenue. The
With all due
general fund
respect,
has
I'm sorry, I didn't
expenses.
ask you the question. I asked.
It's just a
I'm asking
recurring
you to
item
decide.
that
order.
certain
No,
members of
because
this committee will
I'm
not
sorry.
get
Just
beyond.
point of
It's
order.
really important.
Councilman Reed, I know you have
Tell
a
me how much
question.
of other funds. Tell me separate.
Point of order. I'm sorry. I just don't know who has the floor. I don't even remember Councilmember Kelly being granted the floor by the chair. I don't.
Yeah, she was still asking questions, but you know, we've discussed the PPRT. We passed the PPRTs going to the general fund. Hitesh, can you answer the question one more?
Yes.
We will go over to Councilman Reed.
Yes, and again, this thing has been brought up many times. There is no confusion. I mean, people do. When I talk to a couple of my counterparts, PPRT money is deposited into general fund. That's the one thing. Second thing is, I heard or I read in the email that PPRT, 100% of the PPRT is required to go to the pension fund. That's not the right statement. I mean, we have shared even, I think the Fire Pension Board President shared, where it says the example from Department of Revenue, and they said use the word 10%. And that 10% even includes the IMRF, Social Security, and Public Safety. So, and that's when I said that in the past audit, sometimes in 2000, for many years, we used the percentage of 4.76%. Now think about, and just to give you an idea, I would like to use this platform. How much property value of real property today and how much of the personal property of the cars and all that? Obviously, the real property would be almost 90 to 95% versus the personal property would be 5 to 7, 8%. So it makes sense, you know. I might have $1 million home, but maybe 2 cars worth 100,000. So it's 1/10 of that real property. So that was the whole concept that, okay, what was the tax levy in 1974 or 78 before this law was abolished and the new law was set up. So it makes all sense, you know, that most of the taxes were on real property, which is the houses and obviously the commercial property, you know, and versus the personal property, which would be a lot less share, you know, 5%, 8%, 10%, whatever at that time. So that's the other thing. Now, personal property replacement tax goes into general fund. The city council for the last couple of years said that we should provide 100% funding by 2040 and we should not raise the tax levy. Any excess would come out of the general fund. And that's what we did. We kept the levy flat for the police and fire pension. Any excess money came out of the general fund. Now, one more thing I would make it clear. If you compare the last 3 years PPRD money, take the 24, what we are budgeting 25, take the 23, we have given them a lot more than PPRD. PPRD is expected this year at 2.5 million. Next year is expected at 2.5 million. What are we giving to the pension fund?
I'm sorry, but my question isn't really about the PPRT, it's about the other money. So I understand that we're funding, we're taking some PPRT. I want to know about the other funding. How much is other funding and where is it coming from?
It is coming
For the
from
pension.
one part, Councilmember Kelly. PPRT goes into general fund. I cannot say whether I'm taking out.
We have to move on because we have a lot of questions.
Okay. So we're not going to get clarity as to how we're funding our
It is
pensions.
funded
Thank you.
out of the general fund. That's I don't know how far and how long I can. Okay.
So, yeah, Councilmember Kelly, or I'm sorry, Chair.
Oh, you have the floor.
Acknowledged. Okay, thank you. I think, Councilmember Kelly, that you've got it now, that it's a general fund, and that means it's funded through all of the other sources that the general fund funds. Here's what I'll say on that.
It's not an amorphous fund.
Say it again. It kind of amorphous, but that's what the general
It's not,
fund is.
and it shouldn't be.
Well, okay.
We're
Hold
a
on. I
public
got the floor
body,
now.
and we need to know how
Hold
we're
on. I got
funding
the
it.
floor. I just wanted to try to address that, and I'm going to go a step deeper, and maybe you'll find this satisfactory. Right? We understand that PPRT. I think it's in the pension policy that it's going to be going to our pensions. I think what Councilmember Kelly, Carl Klein, and all those folks who are upset about this, they just want to see PPRT, instead of it going through general fund to the other thing. We know that it's happening. It's happening. Let's just put it in with the pensions. So it's directly, is there a reason that we can't have it directly going into our pension fund?
PPRT money, and it's been like that for years, even when we fund.
But is there a reason that we can't? Is there a reason that on paper it just can't show that it's going directly?
The one thing is the PPRT amount is varying in wide, like from 2 million to 4 million, 5 million, 6 million.
But
That's the one
we make it a
Right.
projection that we're going to get whatever
The
in
second thing
PPRT.
is, I think as far as, and I think, any of this, particularly David Livingston, committee member, or Sherry, when we put the word there in the pension funding policy, the statutory requirement under the state is 4.76 or whatever percentage.
Sure.
But it's not 100%. It might be somewhere around 5 to 10%, And what we say in the funding policy is, if you read the thing, I think we have the funding policy somewhere too. One of the many, like one of them is tax levy, PPRT, and general fund balance and all that.
Right.
And the one where we say
Your
that it's a maximum allowable PPRT. Now, and I think our legal counsel explained that what we meant is what is required under the statute. Allowable means, what is required for us to, so we will. I think it was never a sense of the committee, and I think the committee members can explain better than, that it was never meant that, okay, we'll give 100% of the PPRT to the pension fund because it's not required.
Sure. As a committee member, I can say that was my belief.
Okay.
And it seemed to have just been affirmed by you saying that we're giving over 100% of PPRT. So if that wasn't the policy, that was my understanding. I think, Councilmember Kelly, who really, pushed to get this part of, this policy, I think that was maybe most of our understanding. So maybe this committee needs to adjust that policy to make it clear that we're hoping that 100% of PPRT went to this. If the folks who disagree with that, maybe they do. But what I'll say is that if we are of the current understanding that 100% of PPRT is going to our pensions, let's just.
I won't define
and just
that
to
way,
ask,
characterize that way. That's the thing.
you wouldn't. So you're saying that you don't see it as
Right.
well. Then I don't know if the response to the question should have been that we're giving over PPRT, but and then does it really matter, why would we even list out PPRT in the policy as its own individual thing? I want to move on from that because that wasn't my original line, but I do think that that could just make the budget more
And I
transparent.
would just say one thing, Councilman
Sure, go
Reed,
ahead.
you brought up the intent of the committee and the council, and including the staff, was to give 100% pension funding. Yes, give the contribution based on 100% funding. That was the underlying intent, that yes, we want to move from 90% by 2040 to the 100%.
No, I understand that, but I also thought that we were committed to 100% of PPRT, and if that fell short, then dipping into the either property tax levy or as the last line or the general fund. But I do want to ask about two items. So ambulance fees, that was, again, it's kind of on the revenue side, but it was just displayed here as a potential loss of revenue. And so there's a page that, has the highlights there. That might not even be it. If you can go up to the one that, has that. Okay. So do we know about, so we're projecting a shortfall, a pretty small shortfall, but and it seems like there's a standard formula here that just we're at the halfway mark. It looks like everything was stopped at the halfway mark. And are we including trends? I don't know if there's an uptick in ambulance calls during Thanksgiving and Christmas. And if, so I'm just curious, are we just blanket saying we're halfway mark? What is the formula? Are we using trends in specific areas?
Definitely, not just going by the numbers and extrapolate out. We talk to the department, what's going on and all that.
Okay.
And based on that, we come up with the 25 projections.
Okay.
So another piece within that is our billing company, Andres Medical Billing, was bought out by EMSMC, and there's been some billing related issues of getting the revenues that has made it difficult for us to track and project over the course of the year. So they're catching up on some bills that they missed earlier in the year. And so that's part of where there's this range, and some of the uncertainty is coming from this billing change that happened and them getting caught up from the beginning of the year.
Okay.
To further clarify, we're at 2.1 million with 3 months left.
Mm-hmm.
So if you figure, that puts us right around 3 million at the end of the year. But to Mike's point, we've seen so much variability because of this buyout over the last few months. We've kind of offered up a pretty big range here as to where we can finish.
Okay. And the other reason I ask about the ambulance fees is because we just bought a shiny new ambulance. I don't recall if we have it yet. I know a lot of these things take time, but do we have that new ambulance, and is it on the streets?
The third ambulance is...
Good evening, Councilmember, members of the committee. Luke Stowe, City Manager. The third ambulances that you all approved the staffing for in the past year, that ambulance is up and running. We did recently purchase a new ambulance. That ambulance has not arrived yet.
Okay.
So that ambulance will be put in circulation, and one of the 3 existing ambulances we put in reserve status.
So we used to have 2 ambulances. Now we have 3. Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
And so the third ambulance, this is the first full year with the third ambulance, or how?
Correct. Yes.
It was supposed to increase revenue, right? Or wasn't it supposed to do something positive for revenue?
Yeah, and Mike might be able to speak to this a little bit better too. By having a third ambulance, it means fewer calls from outside of the jurisdiction. So like Skokie and Wilmette would come into Evanston less often, which would potentially increase our revenue. But I don't know if you want to add to that, Mike.
Yeah, I would say that the addition of the third frontline ambulance is more about distribution of the workload among folks. I think this year the increase in budget was driven more so because of the increase in billing and ambulance billing from $1,500 a call to $2,000 a call was really what drove the increase in our revenues for 2024. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then final question here for me on this before we move on is so sales tax and income tax, the state's income tax distribution to the city, were both up. Particularly sales tax is up by about $1 million, if I remember correctly, and I can't really see that far. But
Sales tax compared to budget is projected between 13.5 and 13.8, and we had a budget of 13.
Okay. Yeah, just it. Well, I guess I'm curious. I've asked this before. I've just been curious about how this increase, both what we projected and the increase above our projections, how much of that is there a way to calculate how much of that is accredited to inflation and how much of that could be an indicator of a healthy sales market, a healthy market here in Evanston?
Very difficult. The data from the state of Illinois, as we get it, is not clear as to what's online purchase. So a couple years ago, online purchases became a thing too, where we could collect our home rule sales tax as a result of online purchases. The state, when they remit the data to us, we can't differentiate between what's even online versus what's brick and mortar sales. That alone makes it, that's just one example of how difficult it is to really use their data, dig into it, and project whether it's inflation related or economy related. We look at the data year over year, and so we have tables on our own that we use to help make these projections. And they've been fairly accurate the last couple of years compared to previous years because we've really looked month by month and how we're tracking. But to answer your question, not super easy. I mean, if there's neighborhoods where if there's certain businesses where we want to see like, hey, along this block, we know that 3 or 4 business fronts have been filled this year that were vacant 2 years ago. That's the type of analysis that we could do and say, well, now this block is generating X amount in sales taxes for the city versus 2 years ago when it was vacant, right? That's the kind of thing where we could do it. It's super regulated by the state. You can't share the sales tax data, as I'm sure you know. But if there's those types of individual analysis, we can definitely put them together and make them.
Yeah, I think it would.
Okay, we're going to have to go a little, because we still have the CIP to go through. So I know Committee Member Livingston and Committee Member McMillan, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just we have a big CIP to go through too.
So I guess we're talking about revenue. Are we talking about just revenue questions now, or?
Yeah, I don't think we got to revenue.
I think
we were doing
the final point on this pension funding issue. There's about 100 lines of revenue that go into the general fund. All of that revenue is used to make all of the expenses. It is impossible to track how an individual revenue item that is used for an individual expense. I think ultimately the test is here, we are contributing more to the pensions than the sum of the pension property tax and the total amount of PPRT, even though the total amount of PPRT is not the legal requirement of what has to go in to use the pensions. So I just wish we could get beyond this. We keep, in my mind, wasting time on this discussion relative to tell us exactly what the source of the pension funding is. It is impossible. It is coming out of a large pot of money that is used to make the contribution, but there is no argument that we are not spending, we are contributing more than the sum of the pension property tax plus the PPRT. And I just wish we could get, which is well beyond the requirement, but just get beyond this.
The amount of money we give to pensions in 2025 will very likely be more in 1 year than the amount of PPRT we received in 23, 24, and 25.
PPRT is a diminishing form of revenue, yes, in any case. So it's just we keep getting drawn into this discussion, and maybe I'm part of it. If we're
you just drew us in.
I'm sorry?
Well, one
I'd
person
like
has
to
the
respond.
floor.
I mean, since David's brought us back into this discussion.
You know, we have a lot to go over tonight. I know. Did you have anything else?
I do have something else. I do have something else to say. All right. My point about the state of the general fund, financial planning is not about looking at things at one point in time. It's about projecting them into the future. And I agree.
Exactly. And that's why we identified as Devon said, let me speak now. I'm sorry.
No,
You're going
You
to
have the floor.
This is
Member Livingston has the floor right now.
The allocation of 100% of our PPRT, it's to protect.
Yeah, Councilmember Kelly. Committee Member Livingston has the floor.
Finally. Okay. We are sitting at $52 million in total reserves right now. But our trend, as shown on 15, because we have done nothing to raise incremental revenue to make the pension contributions that we all want to make, takes us below our target level in 26 and to almost no reserve in 27 unless we do something. That was my point about the state of the general fund. A snapshot in time looks fine. 2 years from now, we're below our target level. 3 years, we're almost at no reserve. So we need to acknowledge that there's going to have to be incremental revenues over the next couple of years to maintain the pension funding that we want to do. And I want to talk about that when we, at the appropriate time, because I don't think a $0 increase in the property tax levy is the correct approach for this year's budget. But at the right time, we'll talk about that.
Committee Member McMillan?
I, at the risk of bringing up a topic you're tired of, I agree with my understanding of how the pensions were to be funded were in line with Councilmember Reed's. And if that's not correct, I'd like some more clarity around that. I don't understand. I think his proposal of having a line item in there showing, PPRT, yes, it's all fungible, but showing that it
we have a slide in a couple slides.
Doesn't seem impossible to me.
Yeah, we do. When we have our pension meeting, there is a slide that says property tax, the tax, the PPRT, and other money from general reserves. So we have presented that.
As long as it's, those two match, I don't think there should be much confusion. And then secondly, I know, David, you're a proponent of raising the levies, but there's also another way of doing financial planning, which is reducing your expenses, which is what I would be on board with.
Or new revenue.
Sorry?
Or new revenue
Or
from
new
other
revenue.
sources that aren't property taxes.
User fees.
Okay, I think we're going into revenue now. Or you're done with that?
Talking about property
Property
levy.
tax
We've
levy.
already talked about
Okay,
this.
with revenue and expense, let's go to
How did we keep the property tax levy flat in this year's budget? We've moved some of the levy around in order to do that. So in the general fund tax levy, you see a slight increase. You see a slight increase in the human services fund. This is one fund that very concerned about the future health of. We've added a couple programs in recent years. The Mayor's Summer Youth Program came up earlier. That program has been expanded a bit. The amount of money that we pay to students or to young folks, as well as the number of jobs that we fill, has grown in recent years. All of that, along with some increases to mental health allocations. This is a fund where expenses, you'll see in the budget, are greater than revenues. And so it's kind of a similar trajectory to the general fund. We're trying to be proactive here and shifting some money around in order to increase the levy there a bit. Solid Waste Fund, they've had some delays on delivery of garbage trucks. And so because of that, we're able to do a 1-year reduction to that property tax levy and shift that money around. And then General Assistance Fund has built up a sizable reserve where they can afford to reduce that levy by $300,000. The library levy, not really controlled by the city, but they are proposing a 4.7% increase here. And they'll be at future city council meetings to discuss their budget proposed request as well. So when you talk about the tax levy and where in the tax levy we are leaning into reserves in order to continue moving expenses and programs and services and meet our pension obligations, there's really 5 levies here where we are leaning very heavy into reserves. One is the general fund tax levy, the human services fund tax levy I just mentioned. Expenses in that fund are budgeted at $5.9 million against revenues of $3.3 million, just given the scope of programs that have been added within that fund. So we're leaning heavily into reserves there. In debt service, we're leaning into reserves to meet our debt service obligations instead of passing along the tax levy increase for the most recent bond issuance this year. And then in the pension funds, leaning very heavily into reserves in order to meet that obligation. As we talked about, we can talk all day about how much PPRT in that conversation, don't want to go there again, but we know that the amount of money going towards pensions next year is $9.6 million, and PPRT alone is $2.5 million. That amount is expected to continue in the next 10 years worth of budgets. So eventually we have to decide if PPRT doesn't turn into a $9.6 million revenue source, how we're going to make that contribution in the future. So we flagged this. It's in the budget. It's a concern. You can reduce expenses. You can identify other revenue options. You can go to the property tax levy. These are all things that we don't have to consider necessarily right now as part of this budget, but they're going to come up based on how much reserves we're using in order to balance this proposed budget. We've already shown this a couple times. When you look at our property taxes, we do have a couple slides on property taxes showing how our rate compares to other communities and how our property taxes compare to other communities. You'll see this is based on the most recent tax data from Cook County. Our tax rate far below all the comps that we all agreed to earlier this year. When you look at our property tax on an average $500,000 home, a $500,000 home in Evanston may look a little different than a $500,000 home in Palatine or Arlington Heights. But if it's a $500,000 home, you're paying less property taxes on that home in Evanston than you are in any of the comparable communities that we've identified. Looking at our property tax levy over time, and again, it's a flat levy, but we want to spend some time here because it took a lot of work to keep this property tax levy flat in this proposed budget. When you look at how it's changed since 2013, you can see essentially no growth since 2020. The blue bar at the bottom is the amount of the property tax levy that we have available for police, fire, public works, parks and rec, general fund operations. And you can see in 2013, the blue bar and the amount of general property tax money we had for those operations, essentially the same as it is today. Despite year-over-year inflation that's never been seen before, we're still working with the same pot of property tax money to fund general fund operations. And looking at it this way, you can see in 2013, property taxes paid for 20.1% of general fund operations. In the 2025 budget, they're paying for just 7.8% of general fund operations. So we've grown more reliant and diversified our revenues over time in order to hold it flat. But certainly have seen expenses. You can see this is total general fund expenses have gone up from less than 100 million to closer to 150 million, just given wage increases, inflation, and other expenses. Just really quick, other fee, the budget only has 2 fee increases in it. One is the water rate fee increase, which we talked about last month, which is offset by the sewer rate decrease, comes out to about $5 a month for the average Evanston resident. And then the solid waste rate increase of 7.5%, that was discussed and approved as part of last year's budget. So it's just included in this year's budget, but it's a fee increase that's baked into the solid waste fund. I've already talked about public safety pensions a bit, but you'll see here, this shows our total contribution to public safety pensions since 2022. This shows how the city is making those contributions. You can see the property tax levy frozen at pre-2022 levels, and the $9.6 million contribution coming from PPRT, general fund, and other funding sources. And as I said, you can see the budget for PPRT is 2.5 in 25, 2.5 projected in 24, and you can see our contributions to pensions in these 2 years far exceed the amount of PPRT that we are receiving. Looking at new positions, and again, I'm just trying to get through as many slides as we can to give you an idea, and the 6 new positions included in the proposed budget, 3 of those in the general fund. Of those 3, 2 are offset by reduction in contractual consulting services and moving those positions to full-time staff. Those are in the community development department. The new positions in the human services fund and sustainability fund are both fully grant-funded positions. So while they increase our FTE count, we've identified grants that offset the cost of those. And then in the water fund, 1 new position is requested that sort of lines up with the lead service line replacement increase, the increase in the need to replace lead service lines. This is a position that's sort of resulting from that need. Menu of options, Councilmember Reed alluded to this earlier. So as part of this budget, we've put together a list of 38 ideas, some that came from Councilmember Reed as part of last year's budget, others that came up from staff as we put together this budget this year, a handful of revenue ideas, a few expense ideas, if we don't want to go forward with the full $12.5 million coming out of excess reserves, or if there's other programs or services that we want to include in the budget, if we can tie them to something on this list in order to fund them in lieu of reserves. We wanted to put this list together. This was something that the City Council asked us for. In past years, understand that we've just sort of proposed a budget without a lot of pathways to getting it to adoption. And so this is our attempt to help kind of create some options that this committee and City Council can ponder as we move the budget closer to an adoption phase. In terms of CIP, as I already mentioned, the CIP that's in the budget mirrors the CIP that you saw last month. Laura has worked to prioritize the projects and certainly available for questions, far better source to answer any questions you may have regarding CIP, depending on time. This is our proposed calendar, so we're here tonight presenting.
No, we would like to go back to CIP.
This is my last slide.
Oh, okay.
So proposed budget calendar, we're discussing it tonight. We plan on presenting it at City Council next Monday. We have a budget public hearing at the end of this month. And you can see several meetings. We have ward meetings scheduled with many council members. We have a truth and taxation public hearing on November 4th as well, hopefully culminating in adoption of the budget with a target date of November 25th. So happy to turn it back over to Laura if you have CIP.
I think Councilman Reed, did you have a question?
Yeah. Before we get to CIP, I just had two. So one, I'm excited to see some new revenue proposals. I really think we should try to. I think one, there are more expenses that are coming. Councilmember Kelly has a proposal that's in economic development. You know, the programs that I just listed. There's going to be more expenses that we need to address before this is over. Participatory budgeting is something that'll be brought up. There's a whole host of things that the community and the council wants to see done. So I'm expecting that we'll need more than the $12 million by the time this is all over. And so I really think, and I also agree with folks like Member Livingston, that we can't just look at the budget today and say that things are hunky-dory and that they'll be fine for the coming years. We know that we have all of these. So we have to find new revenue. I think we need to be equity focused and just, you know, smart in modern government and realize that we can't solely rely or so quickly rely on pulling the lever of raising property taxes. The last thing that we want to do is make it more costly to live here in Evanston, especially when you're for housing. So I think we really need to focus our new revenue on sources that are accounting for fees or accounting for costs that the city incurs for providing services to folks in our town, accounting for fees that are related to the misuse of our environment and, you know, that are car related and emission related and all of these things that push us toward the healthy society that we want to be and that's equity focused. So we need to focus on those sources of revenue. And so I just want to highlight that. And so I really encourage members of this committee and council to take seriously the charge of looking at some of these new revenue sources, particularly those that will incur a cost that is bring in revenue that's more equitable and that also spreads the cost out, you know, like the plastic bag fee. And there are others that not only Evanston residents pay, that folks from outside of town or large corporations that are making money here pay. And so I encourage folks to do that. I just have two questions. One is a pretty kind of silly, simple one, but for years and years, we've used this, that the city is 20% of the tax bill. And we've used that same dollar chart that you folks have up there, that thing. At some point, we got to drop below that 20% when we've held steady on property taxes and the other units of government have raised property taxes.
We're at 19% now.
Yeah, let's get our 19% there and accurately reflect it so we know that we've actually gone down as a percentage of your property tax bill. So that's you could call that an improvement, but
No, we want to be, yeah, and again, I mean, I see the 23 numbers is a good point. Our rate is 18.93, including library.
Right.
If we exclude library, we would be around at 16%. And so that's good, you know, 18.93 includes all the pension,
right,
general assistance, general corporate levy, library, and everything else, yes, debt service, yes.
So, one, I think that's something to highlight, that we've made progress in that regard on keeping costs down. And this is a kind of a niche question. How much do we spend on trash collection per year? It came up in the slides, but both on the, you know, the city handles recycling ourselves, is my understanding, and then we have a contract with, you know, whoever it is now, Groot or.
While he's looking for that, if you do go to that link, this is really good. There's like 30 ideas here, and we can discuss at the 29th, and I know City Council. So thank you guys for doing this whole list. And after this question, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Briggs because we got to go over CIP.
And then I would encourage, the media that are here, both Daily Northwestern, I presume, and Bob, like, help us get these new revenue ideas out there to the community. So folks give us feedback. All right.
$7 million,
$7 million on trash collection.
both in-house and the stuff we do contractually.
Yeah. So that's not an insignificant amount that we are spending annually on that. And, with new salaries that will increase. I just want to put this out there that there are other ways to collect trash. And I know there are plenty of arguments that likely our health department will have in one way and maybe arguments in another way. But this idea that all of us go out and gather a bunch of stuff and then we bring it back to our house and then we expect someone from the city to come out and collect all of the stuff that we've brought to our house and take it to, somewhere for us is kind of ridiculous. And it's kind of a luxury service. And I don't think we should, it's become, and then if you look at, not only the $7 million a year that we spend directly on the service, then it requires alleys and we have to maintain those alleys so the garbage trucks can run. So it's actually a very huge investment, both in infrastructure and in annual cost. And it's kind of a silly thing that we shouldn't necessarily expect as a standard for government. And maybe you bring all this trash to your house and then you bring all that trash somewhere else. And of course, as a city, we have, we want to keep sanitation high, but there could be more centralized locations in neighborhoods where folks go and discard of their trash. This is, if you look at other countries are doing it just fine. It's not the norm globally that someone comes to your house and collects.
Okay, we'll bring that up.
Right,
I'm sorry. I just want to give Ms. Briggs
sure.
the
All right.
time.
Hi, I don't actually really have a formal presentation. More here to answer questions. We did develop the capital program. This is like the total capital program. It does not include some of the prioritization that we're doing right now, and we're going to be finishing up in the next day or two for presentation to the City Council on Monday. But as usual, I think one of our biggest challenges is really the monies that are coming from the Capital Improvement Fund. Quite a bit of that has to do with the general obligation bonds. And as we talked in the past, that is pretty much used by all of the areas of the CIP. However, for areas of parks improvements and facilities improvement, that is pretty much the sole source of funding that we have. And so as we go through looking over the next 12 months or however long we need to take to discuss it, really trying to decide what is an appropriate revenue source for how we fund our parks and facilities capital improvements, I think is really a worthwhile discussion to have. One conversation that we had last meeting that was asked was if we took all of the general obligation bond that is spent on annual investments that are used to just do regular maintenance like sidewalk repairs, what would that be? That is $6.4 million of what is currently the roughly $23 million general obligation bond proposal for 2025.
So what are you projecting? So that 28 million, are you saying the only source would be GO bonds for that?
No, so that category does include some other things when we get some grant monies that come through or transfers into the fund from other locations. That is included in that. But currently of that 28 million, roughly 23 million is general obligation bond proposal, which we can try to reduce. We will reduce it some, but as long as we have significant parks and facilities needs, we currently do not have a lot of options there other than the historic practice of issuing debt for those needs. So if we want to change it, we need to make a wholesale change in how we do things. And that money is not available elsewhere right now. It has not been identified.
Okay, Councilman Kelly, I have one question, then I'll turn it over to you. When we talked a while back like projects that would take 2 or 3 years, we were going to only budget the 1 year. Is all this like 1 year budget, or are there things in there that could take 2 to 3 years?
It's primarily 1 year budget. We did try to smooth out some of our bigger projects so that they are smoothed over 2 to 3 years.
Okay, Councilman Kelly?
Thank you. I had comments from a while ago, but I'll save those for the 29th. But I think we just really overall need to do a much better job at scrutinizing our discretionary expenditures. And I think we really can then fold into our regular line item costs some of the maintenance and upgrades of our facilities, including sidewalks and other normal public maintenance projects that should go on year to year. So that's what I would ask, that we do a much better job at really scrutinizing those discretionary expenditures. I also just want to make a point with regard to the previous conversation about affordability and, fees. Fees add to the cost of living in Evanston, and that's what a resident looks at. I mean, they look at the overall cost, not just the taxes, but the fees. Everything all adds up. So as we look at these, we really need to take that all into account, that whole package, and how it impacts affordability. And again, I'm going to concur with committee member McMillan, that we really need to do a better job at looking at where we can save cost in terms of expenditures that are not necessary. Thank you.
And one thing we've talked about is a CIP policy, so we can really, what items really are CIP, what are just normal maintenance, and maybe some guardrails as far as overall spending, just so we don't wake up and, have a big bond and issues. So that's something down the road we're going to work on as a committee. Okay, do we have any other questions? What I'm thinking is there's a lot to go through here, a lot. So if you have questions, maybe we can email them before the 29th to Hitesh, and then you can kind of address the questions from the committee, because there's a lot of questions. And
can I just say one other thing that we talked about previously, did not come up? We need to understand the losses we're incurring in the community centers, particularly Crown, right? So there is no excuse that Crown should be running $1 million plus deficit a year. So let's get to what the real numbers are. And you talk about user fees. Where do we have discretion? I mean, some of the community centers probably should run at a deficit, okay? Crown should not be running at a deficit, right? So that's another area where there could be some significant money and significant revenue to say that here there's no excuse for these certain community centers to be running a deficit. So that's another area that I think we can look at to help reduce the $12.5 million general fund usage, reserve usage that we have in the plan this year.
Yeah, yes, we plan to do a budget memo on all the centers, so that would help us, and it's kind of transparent, posted on the website.
Yeah, is there the possibility of getting the Friends of Crown to pitch in more?
I don't know. I mean, I think we got some grants.
Yeah. I mean, they drove the project, so it'd be great if they would make up
Right.
that
I mean,
$1 million.
I don't know whether they've reached their pledge of 15 million. I'll have to see. Lara, do you have it?
I don't have the exact number, but I think they're only a few $100,000 off at
Could be,
most. But they are planning more or less to disband, I believe. So they were not planning on continuing. Their commitment to the city has more or less been met, or is very close.
So
to
we'll
being
be subsidizing their hockey habits for years to come.
well, that's why we want to get
Right,
the,
that's
we
why
want to
we-
get the
absolutely.
income. But
I'm really on board
all
with
of the
that.
centers, the centers. And Laura, when you come back the if we talk 29th, just kind of what you think we'll have to generally be bonding for all of the CIP?
Yes, that will be available.
So if we did a meeting from like 5 to 6:30, only talking about the budget on the 29th, is that okay with staff, okay with the committee?
I mean, we told you, right, we have a packed schedule, including 5 council members on this committee. We have a meeting. Monday is a council meeting. Next year we have, I think, the 3 ward meetings combined, for the 3 ward. So it would be pretty tight, yeah. So let's see if we can, make that day. And we'll keep an eye.
I just think our committee's going to have a few more questions, and we're really charged with digging a little deeper. So if we can, even an hour and a half just on this, we'll send you the questions ahead of time so that we can stick to the plan. So if everyone can send, by the 25th, I'll send an email on that.
And point of order, I really think that this committee could help us identify new revenue sources. I think and I think that could be the greatest impact in the 2025 budget cycle for the council if we dig into new revenue. So I'll leave that.
I'll meet your revenue if you'll decrease my expenses.
You want to cut the trash collection service?
I think that'd cause a lot of car driving.
Okay. Well, and you guys did do a lot of decreases, but it's, there's a lot of programs the city wants to do and a lot of things we want to do. So we can have anything we want, not everything. So we have to pick what's the most important. So I think we're ready to adjourn. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
And also you can just chair declare no further business before us. So meeting's over.
Okay. Thank you again, staff, for all your time on this.